In Legacy of the Force Bloodlines, Boba Fett was back. Last seen as a brief cameo in James Luceno's Unifying Force, he reappears here and is a large part of the plotline. And as a surprise to many readers at the time, he had a family? Yes, that's right. Boba Fett had an ex-wife and a daughter, and as he finds out in this book, a granddaughter as well. Boba Fett's wife and daughter first appeared in a comic in Star Wars Tales, issue number 7, called Outbid But Never Outgunned. Of course, the canon status of stories in Star Wars Tales is dubious at best, but Cintas's canon status was confirmed in an article in Star Wars Gamer, and then later in an article in Star Wars Insider. And Star Wars Insider was the one that gave us their daughter's name, Aelin Vel. Legacy of the Force Bloodlines by Karen Traviss made it to number 12 on the New York Times paperback bestseller list for the week of September 17th, 2006. In thinking back over my memories of Bloodlines, all I really got from it was that there was a lot of Fett and that I was frustrated with how Luke and Mara were parenting their child, which both were true, but there was a lot more here, especially involving Jacen, that I had just completely forgotten. So, a brief summary. Civil war looms as the Galactic Alliance confronts a growing number of rebellious worlds, and the Skywalker and Solo families are caught in the middle. As Han Solo and Leia Organa return to Corellia, Jacen embarks down the same path that his grandfather Anakin Skywalker took. He is guided by the Dark Lady Lumaya, and he has young Ben Skywalker at his side. But in this new galactic order, friends and enemies are no longer what they seem. So in Bloodlines, we follow a few major plot lines. The first is the return of Boba Fett. He finds out that he's dying. He wants to track down Taun We and find out if there's any way to fix his ailments. And he also wants to track down his daughter, Aelin Vel, and maybe make amends with her, since he's dying. On the Corellian front, we have Han and Leia returning to Corellia. Sort of, well, it's complicated. Mainly, Han is conflicted about what they should do about his cousin, Thrackan Sal Solo. And back on Coruscant, we have Jacen being guided by the Dark Lady Lumaya, who is now also on Coruscant, taking a surprising role in this conflict with Corellia, dragging his young cousin down with him, and just generally being a dark side exuding mess that the Jedi Order has absolutely no idea what to do with. So first, Fett. I'm not a big Boba Fett fan. I know that there are some people who absolutely love him. He's their favorite character. And Boba's just a little too strange for me. In his Bantam era appearances, he's an absolute wackadoo. Like, I'm not even lying. When he shows up in the short story collections, he's really weird. And when he showed up in the Bounty Hunter Wars trilogy, you just can't really get a handle on him. There's not a lot of feelings and emotions there, and he backstabs everyone and everything. Like, do not trust Boba Fett. But then, of course, the prequel trilogy brought loads of revelations about him as well, that he's actually a clone of his father, Jango Fett, that his father was the template for the clone army that fought during the Clone Wars, that he's much younger than we initially imagined. And then here in Bloodlines, finding out, unless you read that Star Wars Tales comics and some of the other comic-y stuff that followed it, you could be completely unaware of the fact that Boba Fett has a daughter, Boba Fett has an ex-wife, that Boba Fett now has a granddaughter as well. He's also the Mandalore, the leader of the Mandalorians, despite the fact that he cannot speak their language. He's basically never spent any time on Mandalore. So he's trying to come to terms with that legacy as well, with his impending mortality facing him down, it's not just wanting to figure out where he stands with his family, but also where he stands with his people. And I guess combining some of the things we saw in the Bantam era stuff, he does have this moral code. It's just sort of different than everyone else around him. Karen Traviss, when they were planning out the Legacy of the Force series, specifically asked to bring Boba Fett back, and Lucasfilm and Del Rey said, sure. So, look, here's the thing. Travis loves Mandalorians, so Boba plays a very large role here. And I think maybe your enjoyment of Bloodlines may come down to how much you are a Boba Fett fan. I'm not like an anti-fan. I don't dislike Boba. He's not in my top 20 or anything like that. So at times I felt overwhelmed by just how involved the plotline was with Boba Fett, that he really doesn't have anything to do with any of the other characters until close to the end. Most of it is him trying to track down information about how he can cure his illness, track down his daughter. He hears that his daughter's taken the hit that Thraken contracted on the Solo family, so he knows if he tracks down Han, he'll probably find Aelin. And in the end, he and Murda end up teaming up with Han to eliminate Thraken. It's really Murda who does it in the end. And he finds out that Murda is his granddaughter, that was why she was trying to lead him to Aelin, because her mom wanted to kill Boba for abandoning his family again. And they reconcile, and when we see them in the end, they're heading off to be Mandalorian bounty hunters together. Over on the Han and Leia plotline, they leave Corellia, come back to Coruscant. The Falcon's in bad shape, so they leave it behind on Coruscant, head back to Corellia, and Han's just really conflicted about his family and what he wants to do about Thraken, and he's really worried about Jacen, and he's not talking to Luke. And he's given the opportunity to kill Thraken, but he doesn't do it. And as the book ends, he and Leia are definitely sort of on the outs with Jacen because of the things that Jacen is doing. I somewhat get the sense that the authors don't quite know what to do with Han here, in that they want Han to be that Corellian voice of independence and you don't tell me what to do, but also his kids are working for the Galactic Alliance, his brother-in-law is working for the Galactic Alliance, so there's that conflict here. And I think that definitely plays out in Han's inability to do anything, that he's concerned about everyone around him. He really only has Leia on his side, and he's just there, and he's angry at his family, and he doesn't know how to talk it through, and I don't know. I guess we'll pick this up in subsequent books and see how this progresses. And I feel like Han is focused on more than Leia is again. You know, how does Leia reconcile that she's a Jedi with what she's been doing? There's no resolution here either, so I guess this will be picked up in later books. That for now, she's just supporting Han. She's helping Han out. She's being a good partner and helper. I mean, she is his wife after all. Jaina was the colonel in charge of Rogue Squadron, which is interesting. I didn't get the sense from the previous book that the squadron she was in charge of was Rogue Squadron, but that it was a Jedi squadron, but okay, whatever. She was part of Rogue Squadron way back at the beginning of the Yuzin-Vald invasion. I guess she could take over. She's still flying with Zek. And then Jacen swoops in and he takes control of her squadron, and she just doesn't have good feelings about what Jacen's doing right now, that ever since the events of the Chiss Killik conflict in the Dark Nest trilogy, she feels like Jacen has been manipulating her, Jacen isn't letting her in, that their connection that they have as twins is damaged. And so there's a lot of anger and resentment, rightfully so, at Jacen swooping in and taking her command, and then at Jacen ordering her to fire on civilians who were retreating, which she refused to do, and now she's been kicked out of her own squadron and she's up for a court-martial. Jaina's worried about her brother Jaina is not headed down the dark path that he is, which sometimes is surprising to me because I feel like if anyone were to be more predisposed to falling to the dark side, it'd be Jaina, because just that lingering anger that she always has. On Coruscant, Luke and Mara are arguing about what's going on with Jacen. In a surprising move, Mara is the one that's like, you know, we should just let things be. We should just trust him. I just think he's having relationship trouble with Tenel Ka. And look how he's brought our son out of his shell. And I don't think we should remove Ben as Jacen's apprentice. He's done so much for him. And I sort of want to be like, who are you? And what have you done with my Mara Jade? Like, I would have expected that if anyone were to pick up on the bad vibes that are just constantly emanating from Jacen, that would be Mara, who is very perceptive. Mara often sees the worst in people, and sometimes it is justified, but here she is the one that's completely turning a blind eye to what Jacen's doing, that she's come up with this explanation that makes absolutely no sense, and she's not willing to remove her 13-year-old child from the vicinity of a man who is just an absolute toxic mess? Mara, WTF? Instead, it falls on Luke to be the one like, I'm very worried about Jacen. I don't have a good feeling about Jacen. Why is Jacen working for the Coruscant Secret Police? Why is Jacen doing X and Jacen doing Y and Jacen doing Z? But then again, in typical Jedi Master Luke fashion, he doesn't do anything about it. He's just like, this makes me feel uncomfortable, but I will not say anything and I will not do anything. Is this for the purposes of plot, so that we can get 9 books out of this conflict? Because if Luke had intervened in the very beginning, we maybe wouldn't have had everything occur that occurred? Possibly. You got 9 books here, you gotta drag some things out. But it does make Luke feel so ineffectual that we have a member of the Jedi Order who's just basically off the rails, and members of the council are saying like, hey, we should address this. Silgal and even Kype Durin and Kyle Katarn are like, we are worried about this. But then they don't do anything. They're just sort of like, well, it's not on us to tell Jacen what to do. And it's like, actually, it is. He's a member of the Jedi Order. You are the Jedi Council. I do believe that it actually is on you to say, hey, cut it out. This is not cool. This is not what we condone, and you should not be doing this. But they just, like, let him do this and let him drag his 13-year-old cousin down with him. It's very interesting to me how the pendulum has swung on the perception of Cal Omos in these books. Number one, does the Galactic Alliance not have term limits? Because if I'm doing math correctly, he's been the Chief of State of the Galactic Alliance since Destiny's Way, which at this point in time would mean he's been Chief of State for like 11 years. Poor guy, he just does not seem capable of handling this. He wants to keep things peaceful and diplomatic. But we have Jacen and his newest ally, the Mon Calamari Admiral Niathal, to be pushing for the more aggressive option, the more violent option, and Cal Omos is just stuck in the middle. Which is interesting to me because in the Darkness trilogy, Cal Omos definitely demonstrated a sneaky, manipulative side that has not been seen since. So, I don't know, maybe next book we'll see some of that come to play, but he comes across here as just like completely out of his depth. And that's mainly because of Jacen. Oh, Jacen. Jacen's thinking about what Lumiya told him back in Betrayal, and he's really seriously considering it. He's flow walking through time to see what happened with Anakin Skywalker, which I guess for his flow walking, he needs to be in the exact place. So I guess it's very convenient then for him that the Galactic Alliance rebuilt the old Jedi Temple on Coruscant. But he's also like, I'm not going to go down the same path as my grandfather because he did it all for love, and I'm doing it to make sure that the galaxy is in the right place and that the right things happen and that justice is restored. There's a lot of comparisons to Jason and Darth Vader here, like maybe too many. It starts to become completely unsubtle because like everyone is talking about it. But Mara Jade Skywalker is asked to take over this like Coruscant secret police. She turns it down and Jason's like, cool, that sounds like the job for me. And he's just arresting Corellians who have done nothing and having them deported because, you know, justice and we need to keep the peace and there's been terrorist attacks. I mean, these are terrorist attacks that seem to have been in some way engineered by Lumaya, but like, you do you, buddy. If Jason in Betrayal came across as grim and dark and with no concern for the lives of others around him, Jason in Bloodlines comes off as severely self-deluded. You constantly see how he reiterates to himself that, like, he's doing the right thing. This is what needs to be done. And it's painful to read. I felt at times like Travis had no sympathy for Jason here, and it just makes it hard to read about what he's doing because if not even the author feels a little bit of sympathy for like why he's down this path, it just is hard to read about him and hard to watch him doing these things. That in trying to find out from Aelin Vel who her target was, he's willing to use the Force basically to kill her. He's like, well, I was just trying to see inside her mind. It's not my fault she had an aneurysm and died. There's no remorse there at all. There's no acceptance of the fact that he stepped too far. It's more like, okay, that's how far I'm willing to go. And a lot of it too is like political maneuverings. Like he only takes that position of colonel of Rogue Squadron because he wants to look good to the other admirals. He knows what it means to his sister to just take that command right out from under, and he doesn't care. So I guess in the Jason scenes, what kept me going was hoping that Ben would see how he's being manipulated, that like he is in a dangerous situation and he needs to get out. But at the same time, Ben Skywalker is a 13-year-old child, despite all the references we get to, oh, well, among the Mandalorians, when you're 13, you're a man now. Ben is not a man. He's being asked to do things that he should never do. And he wants to measure up to Jason. He wants to learn from Jason, but he's scared and he's frightened and he's doing things that he doesn't want to do. If Jason's on a downward spiral to the dark side and like he's already in the toilet bowl going around, like he's past, it feels to me, beyond the point of crawling back out. Ben is also getting dragged down with him, and it's so painful to see because it feels to me like Ben is being failed. Like his parents 100% absolutely should step in here and remove him from this situation. But they don't. They let him go along with it. They let him go on these raids to arrest people. He kills people. He's so upset about it. He's this little ball of pain. But as the book ends, he's still with Jason. He's still doing things with Jason. And it just wants to make me cry that like this poor boy, that no one seems to be looking out for him. And he's just going through trauma. So let's head into issues territory here. My first issue is just sort of like a tone issue where it was at times apparent to me that Karen Traviss, a British woman, was writing this novel, not Aaron Alston or Troy Denning, both American men. And the first was a tendency to use British terminology that I was not familiar with and had to look up. And I would especially say like British military terminology. So at one point, Jason orders them to turn around the Bowser, and I was like, Bowser? And it's like a supply ship, and that is 100% not an American term. Multiple characters said they needed to recce, R-E-C-C-E, and that's like an abbreviated term for reconnoiter, which I am familiar with, just I had never seen recce before. And just stuff like that, where because Karen Traviss is British, she's using a vocabulary that American readers would not be familiar with. And for the most part, the people who write Star Wars novels are Americans. My second issue would just be that because Karen Traviss is so interested in the Mandalorians and she loves the Mandalorians, all of a sudden out of nowhere we just have characters referring to the Mandalorians in a way that felt unnatural, like Ben thinking about how, well, I'm 13, if I was a Mandalorian that'd mean I'm a man now, and then other characters being like, just casual references to Mandalorians that have never popped up really in Star Wars up to this point. And I think it works for Boba Fett because obviously he has the mindset to constantly be making these comparisons and references. But for a lot of the other characters, it felt like it came completely out of left field. And I was surprised by them making those comparisons because they haven't done anything like that in the past. And then my third issue was just feeling, for all the attempts at continuity and making this be like you can track the days of the Corellian conflict, that I felt a disconnect between how the conflict played out in Book 1, Betrayal, and how it played out here in Book 2, Bloodlines. We got a few references in Betrayal to people talking about like, I don't want the Empire to be back, or to be like, oh, if only the Empire had been here. And then we take it like 5 steps further in Bloodline, where people are chanting, the Empire's back, that the Galactic Alliance, in trying to stop this conflict with Corellia, is behaving just like the Empire. And that Admiral Plain, Supreme Commander of the Galactic Fleet, steps down because he does not want this secret police to form. And it just like moves very quickly for me that it felt like in the first book the issue was about autonomy, and now in the second book it seems that the issue is Corellia wanted their own defense fleet and the Galactic Alliance said no. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a different thing than I thought was going on in Book 1. And I almost side with the Corellians here, like, why can't they have their own defense fleet as long as they say, like, hey, if there's a big conflict, we'll use it to help the Galactic Alliance? Like, that's pretty much how the United Nations work. I guess for me, it's just the escalation here. It just felt like things that were bad in Book 1, but I felt like maybe they were going to be able to talk things through after the Corellians retook Tralis, was completely not the right interpretation going into Bloodlines, and in fact things were a heck of a lot worse. So in short, Bloodlines gave us the return of Boba Fett, and Boba is a huge aspect of the story here. And I think your enjoyment of Bloodlines may boil down to how much of a Fett fan you are. If you are very interested in him and his journey, you'll probably be so excited to see him come back here. But if you're more like me, where he's like a middling Star Wars character for you, you may struggle at times just reading through the sheer quantity of Boba Fett stuff, especially when, for the most part, he seems to be off on a journey completely separate from the rest of the characters until closer to the end. Jacen is really doing bad things here and working hard to justify what he's doing, which for me made this a difficult read, especially in his treatment of Ben Skywalker and just the fact that Ben Skywalker didn't seem to have anyone standing up for him. But things seem to be definitely escalating further here, especially with the revelation at the end that Jacen will have to kill an innocent, and he currently thinks that that might be his lover or his child. So next time I will be reading the 3rd book in the Legacy of the Force series, Tempest by Troy Denning.